MC is in the house. What's up, folks? My name is Justin Garcia, also known as Master Chim, and welcome to the Warrior Stream. I'm here every Wednesday, noon Eastern Standard Time, usually taking a topic, deep diving, having a good time while doing it. And I am usually joined by a group of usual suspects. Before I get into today's show, a little bit of housekeeping. For those of you who have not yet signed up to my free daily newsletter that I send out via email every morning, you should absolutely do that. Now, there are going to be some links in the description, depending on where you're watching, whether it's YouTube, one of my Facebook pages, streaming on X too. If those links are not there available to you, you can go to masterchim.com/email, and the sign up page for the free email newsletter is there. Like I said, it's free. I send it every day. There are some things that I cannot discuss on social media platforms for algorithmic reasons, and I have a lot more freedom and leeway to do that on my emails, so you should absolutely do it. I talked about, having this show today on today's email. And with that, let's get into it. Before we do that, actually, let me just say what's up to Jesse. What's up, brother man? Corey, good to see you. Cherrytown Vibe in the house. Good to see you, brother man. As you guys are popping on, just give me a what's up. Let me know that you are in the house. Pretty good content prepared today, as biased as I usually am. But we're going to be talking about, I think, a problem that a lot of men have these days. We tend to find validation for who we are in some of the worst possible places these days, because a lot of the functional purpose of a man's life has been hidden from him. It used to be very apparent, in years past, because you were born, you had to take care of yourself, take care of the people around you. There are usually a limited number of ways by which somebody would do that. So the purpose and the path were clear to some extent. Nowadays, that is not the case. Nowadays, men find themselves vying for attention rather than value. They seek approval rather than improvement. And these transitions are, I would say, a byproduct of the aquariums in which we live, right? These are all what I've labeled symptoms of surplus. We have so much stuff available. We are not in touch with the natural aspect of our lives. We're not in touch with our very own mortality as often as we once were as a people. And a lot of different issues arise from that unnatural living, obviously. Willie, what's up? Jack Gerber in the house. What's up, brother man? Good to see you. All right, so let's get into today. I sent out an email this morning, as I had mentioned, and I posed a couple of different questions. I'm going to use those questions to sort of direct my talking. If as I'm talking, you guys have a question, feel free to write it down. I'll try and hit it if we have time. But the first question that I posed in the email today that I would be addressing is, what are the stories our mind seeks to construct in order to survive? What are the stories our mind seeks to construct in order to survive? So understand the name of today's show, the name of the talk is The Enemy is an Illusion. Forgot it there for a second. Your memory is also an illusion, apparently. The enemy is an illusion. So that's the context in which these questions are being posed. Again, the first question, what are the stories our mind seeks to construct in order to survive? There are going to be times where we have to face the fact that our relationship with our lives, arguably our relationship with reality itself, is going to be engaged through a lens that we use to build a story and the context of that story around it. The story, or how we react to a stimulus, is going to define its purpose to us, its value to us, and usually the action we're going to take after it. When we look to create enemies, first and foremost, we should understand that if there is something we are doing that does not have value, we need to question why we would do it at all. And I'm not saying it is not valuable to ever label someone or something an enemy. In Tribalnomics, I define what an enemy is. I say an enemy is an identity whose mission is to undermine your mission. In other words, an enemy is somebody that, in order to be true to themselves, they need to bring you down. They need to somehow attack your ability to be you. That is not to be conflated with somebody who you do not have a active functional alliance with, that you yet still may have an alliance with, right? So if you have, let's say, the old ex-girlfriend, the ex-boyfriend, what have you, and somebody who you're not friends, but you know who each other is, but you're also not actively trying to undermine those individuals' missions, that is still an alliance, right? It is still an alliance in that the two of you are going to simply reduce your alliance to acknowledging that each one of you exists. But you are not going to invest any resources into undermining the mission of that person, right? So even though that person might not be on great terms with you, you might not seek to actively pursue any sort of alliance-based rituals with, neither one of you are undermining the other's mission, right? So you're not enemies. So we have to not be emotional when we say, or reactive, or hyperbolic, or just, overdo the whole, oh, this is my enemy or my enemies. And there needs to be an understanding of what that term means, right? So what are the stories our mind seeks to construct in order to survive? Sometimes we label somebody an enemy because it allows us to understand what to do is. And the function of what we do may not be as valuable as the utility of having certainty in what you do. Let me say that another way. This is a very, I would say, valuable point. The fact that somebody's an enemy is less valuable. The fact that you're creating a story, labeling somebody an enemy, gives you purpose in the certainty of what to do than the merits of what you are actually doing. Have you guys ever been in a really bad mood, a really compromised state? Maybe you're aggressive, maybe you're anxious, but some sort of just negative state, some dysfunctional state, and you found yourself being overly aggressive to the people around you. Well, understand that sometimes the certainty of being able to target your frustration towards somebody has a cathartic value. In other words, at times we create these stories that labels people enemies because it gives us a target to sort of direct our frustration toward. And sometimes, while engaging, maybe even attacking these people who we've laid enemies, even though it may not actually be true that they were ever an enemy, we still feel better as a result. And what winds up happening is oftentimes we come to the conclusion that, well, they must have been an enemy. The criteria that I use to label them an enemy must be valid because I've resolved it, and look how much better I feel. Look how much better my scenario is, my environment is. And what you're actually not paying attention to is it's just the certainty of having a target to sort of, project your cathartic process toward. That's the thing that left you in a better state as a result, without the people ever having been a legitimate enemy. So sometimes the illusion of an enemy can present itself in a target for your frustrations. So now, What's the bad thing about that? Or what's the liability of using the stories of our mind to label people enemies that aren't? Well, number one, there's risk. Sometimes you label somebody an enemy, you move towards them and they move back. And then when they move back at you, there might be some damage incurred. So it's irresponsible to sort of pick fights with people who don't really warrant fighting in the first place. Another thing is that it's a distraction. There may be things that you need to do to resolve the root cause of the frustration, but you are busy making yourself feel better by attacking somebody and blaming them for it. Right? So the other thing is you are also incentivizing that process. If every time you feel fucked up, you pick somebody to sort of take it out on and you feel better, well, that becomes the way that you deal with feeling fucked up, which doesn't, again, address or resolve the root cause of why you were feeling that way in the first place. Sometimes we feel fucked up because, there's some fucked up stuff going on that needs to be resolved. Other times, though, we feel fucked up because just the ambient level of friction in our environment or doing what we're doing is just too much for us to bear, which means we need to toughen up a little bit. But sometimes it's a very easy cop-out to just label somebody an enemy, blame your circumstances on an individual, and then just sort of, go and attack them or create some conflict with them at the end of which you feel a lot better because you're spent. You have that negative energy out, Hope that makes sense, right? All right, Shanae, what's up, darling? Good to see you. The next question that I put in the email for today: where is the truth in a landscape seemingly filled with those who would do us harm? Now, this is really a commentary on context. Lori, what's up, darling? Good to see you. This question deals with context. This question deals with what is the big picture? Why is it that if somebody goes to attack you, I was on a call this morning with my mastermind guys, and one of the guys talked about having an interaction, right? A little bit of a conflict with somebody in his neighborhood. And we broke it down on the call. And one of the things that I had suggested is that this conflict that's being presented by this other individual, or that the other individual stimulated, because it was really the guy in my group that probably initiated the aggressive, interaction. Where does it sort of fall against the backdrop of the big picture, right? So I'll give you some examples of what I mean. There have been times where over the last few years, I've had sort of interactions with individuals out and about in different places that in years past would have warranted me escalating some form of a conflict. Well, as it stands right now, there's nothing that I can do that I don't do as a husband and father of 4 kids, meaning the outcome of what is happening affects a hell of a lot more than just the interaction of me and this other individual. So where's the truth to be found in this? What is actually true? What's actually true is everybody's doing the best they can. And when you have somebody who you've labeled an enemy, you have to ask yourself, is it really them being personal with you, or are you just the target of their cathartic process? There are some people that ain't got enough going on. And when something goes sideways in their lives, they're looking for a scapegoat. They're looking for somebody to blame it on. And if you happen to be the target of that frustration with an individual, I think it helps us to understand that it's not about us that they're acting this way. They're acting this way because they don't have other options. They don't have better options. So it doesn't mean that you don't need to deal with somebody who is targeting you for some form of cathartic process in the form of conflict, maybe even violence. The idea that I'm trying to convey, though, is that we don't have to tell ourselves the story that this individual is doing something personalized to us. This is just who the person is. It's like being in the woods with a wild animal that needs to eat, or maybe a wild animal that's wounded that you just happen to come upon, while walking through the woods. We have to engage them, proportionate to the threat that they represent, but at no point do we create a narrative that says there's something outside of our control that's designing this whole thing that's attached to my identity. It's like, no, you just deal with the circumstances at hand. There are a lot of different examples of how I could illustrate this. It's really, again, I used this morning. A lot of times these talks are, my mastermind talks are fresh in my head when I'm doing this talk. So you guys get a lot of the same applications. But I use the example of chess. And I've played chess, or I started playing chess at a pretty young age. I'm not any good at it. I was probably a lot better when I was 12 than I am now. But one of the things about chess, if you're vaguely familiar, is that you have a bunch of pieces that are in the front of your army, so to speak, that are called pawns. And you have special pieces that reside behind the pawns that are of greater value in a general sense. If you allow your pawns to fight your most valuable pieces, you are having a sort of disproportionate amount of risk compared to your opponent as you're playing the game. If I have an enemy and he sends over one of his pawns to instigate a fight with me, and the instigation of that fight is all it takes for me to expose myself to conflict, my enemy will defeat me by just sending enough pawns. He'll keep sending pawns, knowing that I'll engage every one till eventually I run out of resources. And at some point, I'm going to run into some consequence for having all of these engagements. Maybe it's, injury. Maybe it's the loss of materials. Maybe it's sort of some legal liability. But if all it takes to get me to expose myself to risk is engagement, well, then any enemy of mine could just keep sending pawns my way. So you have to ask yourself at a certain point, looking at life as a game of chess where your enemies are concerned, who are you responding to? Are you responding to pawns with pawns? Or are you bringing out your king and queen every single time somebody looks to engage you? So when I say, again, how do I tie this into the theme of today being the enemy is an illusion? It cuts back to the story. Is this person actually an enemy? It's like, no, there's somebody here that needs to be dealt with. Deal with them in a way that allows you to never compromise the big picture, right? So I hope that makes sense. Corey writes, many people these days can't even handle being passed in traffic without taking it as a personal attack. That's right. And you know what? There's it's a multivariate dilemma, I would say, why that seems to be the case. And I would agree that it is the case. I would say you have a lot of men being raised by women without fathers. So they're raised having very emotional behaviors modeled for them. And those models turn into formulas that the individuals develop. You also have individuals who don't have any relationship with their body. And so when they do have that boost of adrenaline, it comes out in a way that is just conflict driven. And there's no relationship with that elevated state that allows them to just sort of keep their cool. In my coaching program, my one-on-one coaching program, one of the things I do when I first have a coaching student is I have him, or I go through with him, an inventory of his life, and What do you do? Who are the people? What do you stand for? What have you done? What are you aspiring to do? Like trying to get a picture of a sort of 3D snapshot of what's going on with his identity. And then I compare what he claims to want to be, what he claims to be building toward, with all the things that he's actually doing. And the first phase of my coaching is really sort of dealing with that disconnect, right? The delta between those two values of what he says he is and what he actually is. And that sort of drives where it is that we're going. Well, you'll have a lot of individuals today that, because they haven't done the work necessary to develop a purpose and a sort of motivation for synchronizing their lives with their intentions, meaning do what you say what you do, because they don't have that purpose-driven process. A lot of times people are walking around very reactive. They have a lot of pent-up energy. They don't have the discipline or the context in which that energy is to be used. So it winds up coming out whenever they want it to. And it serves as, again, another cathartic process that they have available, right? Get frustrated, take it out on somebody. As a teenager, my frustrations, because I had, all the teenage angst that everybody else did. But a lot of my frustrations wound up with me walking around the neighborhood looking to pick a fight with somebody, because even though it did absolutely nothing for whatever it was that was triggering me and making me anxious or stressed out, it was a catharsis that allowed me to sort of just expend a lot of energy. And at the end of that, it allowed me to distract myself and sort of shake the Etch-a-Sketch of all the things that have burrowed into my conscious, right? When I talk about, what we think about during the course of a day, what we're thinking about in any given moment, I use the phrase or the term bandwidth, right? And a lot of times stress and anxiety can be described in our bandwidth having this residue and this garbage from things you've gone through before or stories that you haven't found a way to eliminate, just sort of hanging on. And they wind up informing the way that you're supposed to approach the things as you move forward, right? I would argue some of my best systems for controlling one's identity in that sense, being able to sort of mitigate against stress, is doing the opposite. It is really populating your bandwidth with the things that have you engage things as you move forward with the highest state, with the most optimism, right? The highest percentage of your power and capability. So I don't think it's really a mystery why, when you look at people today, couple that with, again, I said it was a multivariate problem. Another thing worth mentioning is that people are not incentivized to learn how to deal with each other in today's day and age. You will see a bunch of teenagers nowadays, get 20 of them, put them in a room, and they're all going to sit there on their phones. They're all going to sit there on their devices. Or, and dysfunctional, even to the point where they will actually message people in the same room. I'm sure you guys have observed that thing before. The first time I saw two young people message each other while they were sitting next to each other, it was like I was watching a fucking sci-fi movie. It just didn't make any sense. It's like the guy's right there. Like, why? And it's like, but it's hard to talk with emojis. Like you don't have emojis when you talk in the real world. So they feel like they're at a loss communicating, and it's the system that they've been incentivized to engage. People today don't know how to do it. I remember years ago, I was at an event I was speaking at, and one of the other speakers, he and I got into a debate as to whether or not children should learn cursive handwriting. And this was years ago. I had just started teaching my oldest at the time cursive handwriting. I don't even think my daughter was born at this point. And I was arguing that, yeah, kids should learn cursive. And his argument, although logically sound, I would say pragmatically or realistically was flawed. His whole idea or take was, well, it's obsolete. Cursive writing was meant to, and it was meant to expedite one's ability to write. But it is taking on obviously a lot more value than that in society. So he said, well, why would your kids why would you want your kids to learn how to write cursive when there's absolutely no reason for them to learn it? My reaction was because through life, when they're able to write cursive, in the eyes of everybody they engage, they're going to be seen as coming from a different mindset. They're going to be seen as being cut from a different cloth. They're going to have standards because this individual in other applications, he would completely agree with me. We're not just supposed to settle for, the minimum requirement. And I think there are going to be things that, as we pursue them in the real world through ritual, supplement some of the things that we used to get just through living. But because we have such an artificial aquarium that we live in society today, we have a lot of things that have fallen by the wayside. We don't have these engagements, up to and including having conversations with people. So yeah, we should ritualize these things, right? Cherrytown Vibe, right? What made you happy to go pick fights with people, though? So again, I want to make the distinction. It wouldn't be happy; it would be relieved, right? Um, and the same way that people would use, and we would understand. I'll use it as an example: somebody being frustrated and going and hitting a heavy bag, or going and have a run, or there's a bunch of different peoples that do different things, and it represents their ritual of catharsis. For me, that was fighting. It was fighting. And I also used to tell myself, I had a little bit of a hero complex growing up. I'd find somebody that I thought needed to have his ass kicked. And in my skewed, criteria, whatever that was, I could say this now, you'd have to take my word for it, but I never really looked for people that were smaller than me or people that I could just serve as a sort of whipping post for me. It was really, who could I basically fight that needed fighting, and nobody else was doing it, and I was willing to do it. Like, that was a story that I had written for myself. It was obviously ridiculous. A few years back, on Facebook, I reconnected with a high school friend. We weren't good friends, but we were decent enough acquaintances that we remembered each other on Facebook. And we were laughing about, some of the stories of being in high school. And he told me, "Oh man, Justin, you remember you were the biggest bully in school." And I sort of took offense to that, and and we were on the phone talking, and I was like, well, no, I wasn't a bully. And he's like, "Are you kidding me?" And I'm like, "Well, I got into a bunch of fights, but I wasn't going around fucking up people that, like smaller, weaker people or things like that." And and he's like, "Justin, like, you picked fights with almost everybody, and the people that stuck up for themselves are the ones that you fought." He's like that. And I had to re-look at the stories again that I was telling myself. And it's like, yeah, well, for what it's worth, I never intentionally tried to bully somebody. I never intentionally would try and fight somebody that I thought I would only fight because I knew I could win. It was always I was always exposing myself to a risk willingly when I had a fight. But again, that was the story I was telling myself. The people observing it, this high school buddy of mine being an example, they saw it differently. So was it my version? Was it their version? Well, I think the fact that different people could have different versions is telling. It's almost like, well, what version do you think, if you follow it, will leave you in the best possible position? Choose that version. Choose the story that makes you the hero. And then it gives you the opportunity to slay dragons and be heroic. So it comes down to stories again, and the stories that we tell ourselves. Because if we reject the premise of perspective playing such a role in these dynamics, one army's spy is another army's hero. Like, one army's hero is another army's enemy. Like, perspective plays such a huge role in these values that we seem to live by. I would just say that, we should keep that, take that into consideration when we're writing the stories about them, right? Corey says, controlling an explosive temper is impossible without formula since anger management starts way before you get mad. And I agree. A couple of years ago, I created a power program called Second Step Strategies. And that was my answer to that dilemma. To this day, and this is one of the things that I had shared earlier in my meeting, I do not ever anticipate being perfect when it comes to what I label the first beat, right? Or the first step, right? If you have second step strategies, first step is you're about to lose your shit. Second step is you implement a bunch of these formulas to get yourself back on track. Nobody has to be perfect, right? I'm somebody who I think it's part of my identity that I keep myself ready for conflict. And if you're ready for conflict, you have to be ready on the first beat. So I think there is some value, and for the reasons I just described, in being ready for conflict on the first beat. But we also need to understand that, by and large, engaging all the people that we normally would during the course of our days, weeks, lives, not everybody's looking for a fight. So although you want to be ready, we also have to understand when it's time to de-escalate, right? It's a great concept that I got from Sayak Kali called the de-escalation cycle. And how they teach it is, in a conflict, you want to bring your maximum potential online immediately and then de-escalate to match the circumstances. The opposite would be an escalation cycle, which is, somebody breaks into your house and they have a gun and they have crazy eyes and they have blood all over their clothing. And you go, hey, buddy, let's talk this out. Right? That is called an escalation cycle. And then he points the gun at you and you go, oh shit, I should get my gun. And then you get shot on the third beat, right? So an escalation cycle is obviously doing the opposite. It's greeting the individual by surprise, ready to rock, and then adjusting from there. So I would say that it doesn't mean that we should not be ready for conflict. I think where men are concerned, there's a certain responsibility that we have to be capable, and ready in those circumstances. But we also need to have that formula that allows us to sort of down regulate, our capabilities, to match the situation that we're in. Right. What's up, Monk? Monk says, if they do not learn cursive writing, they will not have the ability to read the Constitution and other historical documents. And I think that's another valuable reason for learning also. Like, staying connected to different people in our past allows us to preserve some of the values that those people were looking to share. There are a lot of people, and I would say that, I'm a big fan of Nietzsche. I can't read him in his native language. And I understand that there's always going to be a little bit of offset. That's why I like to read, different translations, different interpretations, because you just get more of a well-rounded picture. It's like if you're, listening to somebody's take on Nietzsche's Übermensch, and the individual who's sharing the take, you would, almost categorize as a weak individual. Well, you sort of embed the potential for that interpretation, in the translation that they're doing. So getting different people's interpretations brings us a more well-rounded, picture of what we're trying to ascertain, at that point. Monk says, what got my temper in check was Chinese boxing and jiu-jitsu training. After several surgeries on my spine and Guillain-Barré syndrome from a vaccine, I only have discipline on poetry and event. Sometimes it's hard to find true self. I would say anything of value is difficult to acquire by nature. and good educations are expensive, right? I think implementing those, two philosophies or observations and how we approach our life, it puts us in a position where we can be grateful for the adversity that we're facing, because it also represents, on the other side of it, power, that had we not had that adversity, we would never have access to, right? So the last question that I put in today's email: how can we thrive in a world that pushes back against our every step? I would say the fact that the world pushes back against our every step is a reminder that we are alive. Without the friction of movement, we are not aware. We're not given the ability to be aware that we are moving at all. If you are somebody who lived the same day over and over and over again, like Groundhog Day, that movie, at some point it would become monotonous. If you've actually seen that movie, I think the writer did a great job in conveying what I think would also happen in that circumstance, where at some point there would be a nihilism, there would be a life that was devoid of value and energy, and it waiting for a way out would be the philosophy of somebody who lived life that way. So when life pushes back and the world pushes back, it's a reminder that we're alive. We don't have to be perfect, right? One of the things that I advocate for, and the Master of the 24-Hour Cycle program is a testament to this. I advocate for individuals winning every day. But in order to win every day, you have to have a day's worth of winning, that you're willing to acknowledge. I can't tell you how many times, I've had fighters train for a fight for, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. At the end of it, they lose the fight and they come to the conclusion, oh, this is all a waste. It was a waste of time. I remember having a student who was very talented, a bit of a mental midget, but very talented. And he stopped training at one point. And when he told us that he was going to stop training, the reason he gave was he didn't think he was going to make it to the UFC. So training wasn't even worth it anymore. And it's like, what an absolute waste of potential. I didn't even tell him that because, listen, you do what you got to do. But when you have an individual who loves being there, who could find happiness and fulfillment in a task well done, who enjoys the journey, they wind up not getting distracted by these future goals and targets. I've also offered before in past talks, a goal is nothing but a direction, a target to aim our efforts. But we want to be able to enjoy the efforts, right? We want to be able to sort of leverage, and enjoy and monetize even our compulsions, our passions, the things that we can't help but doing. It's like, yeah, find a way to build a life around that. And every single day is filled with wins, is filled with victories. I look at like professional athletes who love the sport that they play. I grew up playing basketball. I wasn't really any good at it, but I played basketball and I loved basketball growing up. Growing up in New York City, that's it's a good chance that it's a sport you're going to fall in love with. And I could just fathom right now, it's like, imagine if I got paid to just play basketball every day. Like growing up, it's like, yeah, that would have been awesome because I loved playing basketball. Well, look at the path that I chose at this point. Like, yeah, I love jiu-jitsu, Brazilian jiu-jitsu. I've owned a school for over 20 years. The thing that I enjoy most right now where jiu-jitsu is concerned is teaching my sons. Is teaching the sons of my instructors, of my school, like the next generation of students. Like I make a living doing this, and it's an incredible, incredible way to do so. Why? Because I'm following the things that I'm most passionate about, right? So I would say when we have adversity, it helps to have the motivation, the fire to be able to deal with it. and finding a way to become valuable in the pursuit of your passions is something that I would always advocate for. There's some people that say, follow your passion or do what you love is an absolute joke. Well, I would say if that is all you're offering or all you're saying, then it absolutely is a joke. The idea of it is find something that you have a lot of overlap with, find something that you genuinely enjoy doing, that you don't need a lot of motivation to do. It's self-motivating. And then pressure yourself in that discipline to the point where you become valuable enough that you can make a living from it. It's a process that I've repeated over and over again in different ways. When I do these talks right now, and this talk is on YouTube, it's live, it's free, I'm usually an open book, which is, sometimes I have to limit how much I expose myself to these types of environments. But when I'm doing coaching, one-on-one coaching, I am working with an individual and having very similar conversations. This is what I love doing. These concepts and topics are what I love discussing, what I love figuring out. I love when I introduce somebody to a perspective or a formula, that they could actually, implement step by step that winds up transforming their entire life. There's nothing that I do that's more fulfilling than that. So I found a way to do it and make a living from it, right? All right. Cherrytown Vibe writes, I once heard Jocko Willing mention strategic goals. I'll take my win every day, brother. And, every single day, and again, if you've watched, Master of the 24-Hour Cycle, you'll see this. Every single day, I put a list of goals that I have. I put it on a whiteboard now. I've tried doing it digitally on my phone. It wasn't the same thing. So I went back to the whiteboard. But every single day in the morning, I wake up pretty early and I outline all of the things, all the tasks I have. And I follow what's called the TRIM framework that I talk about in the Master of the 24-Hour Cycle. And this covers all the bases that I have. And every day I look to check off those boxes. I look to make sure that every single one of those things that are listed as wins give me the ability to stack those wins every single day. If I didn't have as itemized an approach to my daily tasks and I just looked at these longer term goals, then how would I manage the wins at the scale of the actual day? Like, I would be like the guy who trained for the fight for 10 weeks, and just because he lost the fight, he said the whole thing was a waste. Some people would hear me talk about it and still say it was a waste. And I would say what those people are missing is what an individual learns about himself in the pursuit of a goal. There are times where whether you acquire the goal or not does not really comment on whether you've gotten the most out of the endeavor. Sometimes training for the fight is worth more to your long-term development than winning the fight, right? I've seen guys not train hardly at all, get in and just knock a dude out. They didn't become a better person through that process. They certainly didn't become a better fighter. What they did was they became more popular, right? And those two things obviously are not the same. All right, folks, let's call it there. I put in some good time. I addressed these questions. I appreciate you guys also putting some questions. There's a bunch of questions I didn't get to, and apologies for that. But I appreciate your guys' time. I know you guys got shit to do just like I do, and you're spending it here with me, and I am grateful for it. If you are not getting my emails, go to masterchim.com/email and get on those emails. If you signed up and you're not getting them, check your spam folder. Got a bunch of other cool things in the links, below. You could check those out, as you want. But I will be here next week, and I hope you guys will too. So gratitude again. And as always, brothers and sisters, pressure to power.